Allie, suddenly the Q&A is working again. It just popped right up this time.
Oh, yay.
Ready?
Did it update?
Maybe. Maybe
Okay.
that's what it was.
All right, I will start the webinar now.
Awesome. Good evening and welcome to our next installment of the free professional development workshop series for artists under the PAiD Public Artist and Development Program. We're going to give it a few minutes to allow folks to find that Zoom link and get logged on before we jump off. So bear with us just for a few minutes as we allow people to get into the Zoom, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Unmute myself. Good evening again, and welcome back to the free professional development workshop series for artists. We're going to continue to allow folks to filter in over the next minute or two, but I also just wanted to say welcome back to those who are attending this series in whole. We're excited to see you here again, and a warm welcome to any new attendees that might be joining us tonight. Again, this is the Public Artist and Development Program. This is a program of LA County Arts and Culture with funding from Mellon Foundation and support and development and delivery by Dyson and Womack. This is nearing the end of our installments of this first series of professional development workshops. And we will be continuing this series next year in a second iteration. Tonight, as always, we will have some opening remarks that we are having right now by myself, Emily Womack. We will then, with my colleague Allie M., introduce some of the PAiD program and the different elements that are part of this program. We will take a look at some upcoming workshops. The remainder, I think we only have 3 left in the series of online workshops. So we'll preview when and what those are. And then we'll dive into tonight's topic. And I am so excited to be joined tonight by Sue Bell Yank and Karen Mack. And we will be doing more introductions of you both in a few moments, but thank you for joining us tonight. As always, I want to call attention to 2 things. One, that the session is being recorded. We will be putting these recordings online for future viewing. So if you're here, you're here. But if there's things that you want to rewatch and re-see at some point, we will always let everyone know once those recordings are hosted on the county site and linked to and available for public viewing. Additionally, we will have a Q&A at the end of tonight. So as we're talking and as we're going through tonight's session, if there are questions that you think of, ideas you want to throw out there, Please use that Q&A part. You can enter your comments or questions at any time during the presentations, and then when we get to the Q&A, we'll read them out and go through them. And just a reminder that Q&A button is different from the comments. So please look for the one that says Q&A in your bar, either at the bottom or at the top of your screen. That's the one that we'll be using to collect the questions. I want to add to that tonight is one of our more perhaps theoretical sessions where we're going to be talking about some ideas about what is public art, what we think about it, and how it's shaped. So I invite you to utilize the Q&A as a way to participate in that conversation if you want to. It doesn't have to always be a question. You're welcome to also give your thoughts and your comments on the topics that we're talking about tonight. I know it's not a direct exchange, but we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to see if anything in what we're talking about tonight sparks some thoughts or interests on your part. So I just wanted to open that up that way too. Before we dive into everything else this evening, I do want to share the land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. I'll leave the rest up for a moment for folks to read. And now I am happy to pass it over to my colleague, Aliem, to share a little bit about the PAiD program in all of its parts, not just the workshops. Go ahead, Allie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Allie, and I'm a project manager at Dyson & Womack, and thank you for joining us tonight. So I'll be going over about giving an overview of all the components of the PAiD program. And first, PAiD is a program of the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, and it's a multi-year initiative funded by the Mellon Foundation. It aims to advance the career growth and economic empowerment of underrepresented artists in LA County. And one of the main goals of the program is to address historical barriers that artists face when trying to enter public art, and also deal with the wider challenges that artists encounter throughout their careers. And as you can see here, the program is made of multiple components. First, the Artist Council. We launched the first open call in last fall, and we'll be launching it again early 2025. And the Artist Council is a group of 8 selected artists commissioned to engage in a series of policy discussions and make recommendations to the county. They will also get to create temporary public artworks, and with our first group, we've launched their temporary artworks all across LA County, and you can actually see a few of them. They're still installed. And if you want to take a look at how to see the artworks or what is showing, you can go on the county's Instagram, or you can go on Dyson & Womack's Instagram to take a look. And then we have the PAiD apprenticeship. So this is another open call for artists, and it will open this month. And I was told it's going to open next week. So this opportunity is open to artists who have never completed a civic art or public art commission, and the selected artists will engage in training and mentorship to complete their first ever public art commission. And then we have the Professional Development Workshop Series. So this is a series of free workshops for artists designed to provide valuable skills and resources to artists of all backgrounds and career stages who are interested in public art. And we have several workshops through October 2nd. And as Emily mentioned, we have 3 final workshops left. And if you want to take a look, we'll be putting a link to all of the remaining workshops on the county's website in the chat. And then finally, the PAiD website. This is another resource for artists, and this website is going to be run by the county on their YouTube. And it will include all of the recordings of the professional development workshops along with other resources relative to the field. The launch is to be determined, but we will notify all attendees when this goes live. And these are the final 3 upcoming online workshops. The next one is on Tuesday. That's next Tuesday, September 24th, and it's managing a project budget. I feel like this one is going to be really essential to managing a public art commission. We're going to be joined by 2 project managers from Narduli Studio, and they have done a lot of public art projects, and they really know how, how to work a budget, how to line itemize everything. I really suggest you attend this one. And then on Tuesday, October 1st, we have administering a public art project, which we will be joined by 2 project managers from the County of LA Arts and Culture. They will be going over how public art projects are basically created, from finding the location, funding, commissioning, the open call, everything. And then the final workshop that we have is crafting a career in public art. We are going to be joined by artists who have sustained a career as an artist and in public art. And I think that this one will be really rewarding for artists who really want to learn more about being a professional and maintaining their career. And this is the link in blue, which I will put in the chat for everyone.
Thank you, Allie.
Mhm.
So tonight's session is titled Why Public Art? This was the public language that we put forward is that we will be looking at field-wide questions about the role and purpose of art in our community and how public art shapes cultural landscape around us and how we engage together to shape that future. We'll look at, the different roles of artists and communities and commissioning agencies as we continue to build capacity in public art across Los Angeles. And tonight I'm joined by 2 other amazing individuals whose careers and backgrounds are essential to the current landscape of art and public art in Los Angeles. And we are going to spend this evening in dialogue, having a conversation about what I just shared. But we're also going to take a moment to hear a little bit about each of these individuals and their organizations. So first, I want to introduce Sue Bell-Yank. Sue is the executive director of Clock Shop. She is also a writer, curator, and educator. And Clock Shop is an Elysian Valley-based organization. If you folks have not heard of Clock Shop, if that's not come across your radar yet, I highly recommend you check it out. Go to the website, see some of the work that they've done. You will see some of it tonight, but it's worth taking a little time to investigate. Prior to that, Sue worked in the arts, entertainment, and public schools for almost 20 years, including in institutions such as the Hammer Museum, 18th Street Art Center. At 18th Street, she formed citywide partnerships, really focusing on the triangulation of communities, the arts, local cultural bearers, and schools. At heart, her expertise is in social impact and how public art installations, cultural programming, and community partnerships inform that. She works with strategic communications, digital marketing, and organizational strategy. Her interests in urban planning and affordable cities have led her to create a 6-episode podcast about housing in LA called Paved Paradise. And she has also taught at UCLA and USC. Yank received a BA from Harvard and an MA from the Public Art Studies from the University of Southern California. Thank you for joining us tonight, Sue.
Thank you so much for having me. Wow, it's really good. So sorry, my 13-year-old has decided to make a mango smoothie right now. So that's happening in the background, but I'll just talk through it. The pleasures of Zoom. Thank you for all being here today. Artists, honestly, is the reason that I do this and that I'm called to this work. Throughout my career, I started in artist residencies. I kind of followed artist residencies among other jobs. And I think it's really because I love the process of working with, talking to, helping to support, and commissioning new work from artists. It's definitely where my passion and my love lies, along with, you know, all the other things in my bio. But I think my interest in cities, our public spaces, and natural resources that we have in common, and how we kind of imagine like our spatial imaginary of the city, along with my love of working with artists to help produce new artwork. I mean, that really has brought together my work at Clock Shop. So if we want to go to the first slide, I can kind of jump into my little 5-minute intro of Clock Shop and what we do there. Great, thank you. So we work with artists to deepen the connection between communities and public land specifically in order to imagine and envision a shared future for our city that's based in belonging and care. And so that's our mission. We've been at our home by this beautiful stretch of the LA River in Elysian Valley Frogtown in Northeast LA for 20 years now. And we produce free public programs on public land. We commission contemporary artist projects, temporary usually, to better connect Angelenos to that land. And we really pride ourselves on long-term collaborations with artists, with governmental and grassroots partners, local residents, especially longtime residents, specifically centering working class communities of color. And we promote ecological stewardship and climate resilience education among those communities as well. So we're kind of sitting at this interesting nexus between the art world and environmental justice and being a community organization. And I think that's something we really share in common with LA Commons, that I'm so excited to be here with Karen today. So there are 2 parks that we have worked with, and that's due to our deep partnership with California State Parks that started in 2014 at this site called the Bow Tie. The Bow Tie is an 18-acre slice of land, and you can go to the next slide just to give some context. This is the Elysian Valley double bend of the LA River. And if you have not been to that area of town in Northeast LA, I highly recommend it. There's a beautiful bike path. And the river itself is a really interesting place in this part of town because it has a soft bottom and a whole ecology growing in the middle of it. A lot of birders come out there, and it's a really interesting sort of natural public resource that we have, that obviously has been irreparably changed by the infrastructure of our city, but nonetheless persists. So the bow tie is the green part that is shaped like a little bow tie on this map. It's part of a future vision for a 100-acre park along the river. And that piece is owned by California State Parks. All of this land is slated for public land and is owned by government agencies for that purpose. It was originally slated to become industrial warehouses all the way up to the river. And it was really due to a community activism and coalition building before Clock Shop even existed, in the 1990s, that preserved this land for public space. Unfortunately, money had run out, as it does, as it has in California recently. And there was no park that was ever built there. So it stayed just kind of this raw, undeveloped former rail yard brownfield in the middle of Northeast LA that was nonetheless still very used by people. You can go to the next slide. And so after some connections and some public programs kind of around the future of this land, we connected with California State Parks, and we built basically a program of commissioning temporary artworks and doing public programs at this site to gain more community interest. And it was really an amazing process of working with artists who were interested in land, interested in pushing scale, were representative of many of the communities that lived around this place, or the layers of history within this land had been impacted in some way. And we're interested in creating new experimental work. And so we worked really hard, and I think we've built up the capacity to do this over the years to spend, fundraise so that artists can really spend a long time on the land in advance of their project, really research, really investigate, and come up with commissions that are highly research-based in their origins. You can go to the next slide. They ranged from performance to sculpture to all sort of forms of media, but they were all new commissioned work from artists that were taking place in public space. Next slide. And I think, one of the capacities that we've built up over the years has been to work with artists, work with government in a really effective way, build up a whole community of, people that have all different sorts of expertise. And we really value many kinds of expertise. So from indigenous culture bearers with a very deep knowledge of the land to, people who maybe lived on that land because they had housing insecurity, to folks who, used it in various ways, both legal and illegal, and kind of, being able to negotiate and navigate all of those different people in a very relationship-based way, I think, allowed us to provide care, support, and kind of technical expertise for artists to take risks in their process and kind of create these deeply informed works that pushed their practices to new heights in many ways. Next slide. You can just go through a couple of these. Go to the next one. So we were able to do work on this land. We did about a dozen artist commissions, over 100 free public programs that ranged from, family field days, and bringing together naturalists and ecologists and housing justice advocates and all sorts of folks to this place. But then in 2020, we had to pause there for the pandemic and moved a lot of our projects to LA State Historic Park, also California State Parks. But the good news is a lot of that was because they were starting to do work on the new state park, which is scheduled to break ground this fall if everything goes well. So it was really a combination of a lot of these factors that I think led to this happening and these coalition efforts. I'll pause there, but yeah.
Thank you so much.
And I want to say I'm really happy to talk about things theoretically, but I'm also really happy to answer very, very practical logistical questions, because I think a lot of times these things are deeply intertwined. How you kind of practically go about getting things done is related to your theoretical and philosophical and like values-based views about how you want to go about getting the work done. So happy to kind of go in either direction on that.
Thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the introduction to Clock Shop and some of the work. I'm a big fan. So this brings us to our next presenter and co-presenter and colleague joining us tonight, Karen Mack. Karen, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Karen is the founder and executive director of LA Commons. About 20 years ago, Karen created the South LA-based nonprofit, as I just said, LA Commons. Again, I know you're going to share a little bit more about it, but I also encourage you guys to do your own research to learn more about these organizations. They do a lot to support the arts and the public arts as well. That's why they are here, but it's worth taking a deeper dive in your own time. The vision behind LA Commons was a vision of communities where everyone has access and freedom to express themselves culturally and to tap the power that creativity provides. She has worked in neighborhoods across the city to implement various artistic programs, foster interaction, dialogues, and collaborations. LA Commons plays a unique role as a facilitator of local engagement in arts and culture, as well as other important issues like health and transportation and education, giving residents, and particularly young people, a voice and an on-ramp to making positive change. I really love that sentence so much when I read this. And the priority that LA Commons puts on mentorship and fostering and bringing the younger generations into that fold is something that I've witnessed and I really value for your work. However, Karen, prior to working at LA Commons, also served as a public service fellow at JFK School of Government at Harvard University, where she researched the role of culture and community building. She holds an MPA from Harvard University and an MBA from John Anderson School of Management as UCLA. And is currently a mayoral appointee to the City of LA's Planning Commission, Equity Chair, and serves on the California Board of Humanities. If you'll give me just one moment, Karen, I will cycle over to your slides, but please feel free to jump in and share a little bit about yourself as I move us to that point.
Well, hello everyone, and what a pleasure it is to be with you this evening, and my colleagues here who are so incredible. Listening to Sue, it always amazes me how the overlap, and I see why your wisdom in bringing us together, Emily, was. I didn't totally have an understanding because I wasn't looking exactly at Sue's bio, but just the real interest in I don't know if I ever told you the story. When I was 17, I called up the president of Cal Arts and I said, I want to help artists. Like, where did that come from? But like there is a deep well of, wanting to unleash the power of artists in community settings because that is so powerful. And, when we think about why public art, that really is at the heart of it, I think, because, we want to give everybody access to that, magnificent opportunity to listen to each other, to create together, and to, uplift communities in these wonderful ways. So, and like, that was when I was 17, and then 20 years later, I started LA Commons after this whole career as, an accountant, and then like a nonprofit manager, and then organizational development supporter at Community Partners, where I drank the Kool-Aid and started my own organization. And so really the idea was that, I was kind of thinking about what made me tick, including the arts and being passionate about that and having this whole alternative life as I was doing all that, going through the Arts Leadership Initiative and making these connections in the art world. So I kind of just brought my worlds together, all the connections that had to do with being in the nonprofit world and in neighborhoods, meeting people with the art world to create this organization that was about empowering people in neighborhoods to through their participation in these programs. Next slide. I love this quote. We work a lot with young people, and it speaks to the fact that everybody in neighborhoods has this amazing story to tell, and the opportunity is to uh, make those stories visible. And I think at a time when truth is up for grabs, the truth is up for grabs, this work is even more important because the truth is inside of us. We are the truth. And so to create this platform for these stories to come out. Like this young person said, each and every individual you encounter has a story to tell. All you must do is lend your ear to listen of their tale and learn that every person is tragically stunning in their own manner. This is like an intern who talked about this, but it speaks to the power of this work that we're engaged in. Next slide. Oh, okay, so you guys get to see what we do. I'm going to show you a video. This video is of, well, you'll see. Is our sound on? I think the sound might not be on.
Emily, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Heart of Hyde Park is just a love letter to the community and the people who came up there, just trying to uplift the area.
With these projects, we want it to really be a community-driven effort.
Talking with Metro, who got in with LA Commerce and got this project going.
And so they were able to secure funding with Transportation for America.
That kernel then resulted in this broader team of young people who then took it as their charge to interview the community.
I've been learning a lot of things that I didn't realize about Hyde Park, this little community I've lived in my entire life.
These are everyday people who have made a positive impact on this community. And that's where it starts.
I'm very honored, I'm very proud, and I'm very glad that I could participate in this project.
We knew that Queen Calafia had to be someone who was regal and expressed power, and she did that for us. That's why we chose her.
A part of what happens with the artwork is that it's alive. When you look at it, you really feel a sense of connectedness.
With Nipsey, the community always depicted him as this king of Crenshaw and Slauson. And so that's why I chose to use the gold leaf.
Kind of like an inspiration for me to know that I'm doing something right in the community for them to even want to put my picture up on a mirror.
As far as the Adinkra symbols, it's a unifying theme in the area, but then they also draw back to Africa. So we were able to take all those meanings and bring them into one wall.
It really is a masterpiece. And I know it's gonna really brighten the corner of Crenshaw and Slauson.
Public art and transportation always go hand in hand. There's nothing that makes those trips better like seeing a dope public art piece.
Really proud to hear from a lot of different people within the community that they were proud of us. Yeah, it just felt good to know that it was appreciated.
I hope that the mural inspires people to open themselves up to those around them.
I appreciate the mural. I think it looks like us. And that was the most important component. I am Hyde Park. I am Hyde Park. I am Hyde Park.
I am Hyde Park. I am Hyde Park. I am Hyde Park.
We are Hyde Park.
So that's video just really is such a great encapsulation of what we hope for when we work in communities, to engage them in telling their stories and creating this opportunity for dialogue. And what was beautiful really about this project was the intergenerational aspect of the work, having, older community members mentor youth and really help them understand the power that resides in these stories in their community. And the ownership that the community still takes of that mural, giving tours, really ensuring that it's maintained, that is the highest honor for us, that the community really values what they participated in making. And, you know, and for them just to feel empowered. This was a community that felt somewhat a bit disempowered by the metro construction. And so this partnership allowed them to, you know, regain agency and, you know, just feel a sense of their place in that community. Next slide. We you know, I mean, these are our beliefs and they're at the heart of everything we do. That culture is, I was talking to somebody just today about culture being an infrastructure. Like that should be thought of as community infrastructure, really. And so recognizing what people have to offer in that regard, you know, often residing in their stories is important. And that, you know, if we provide that empowerment, people can really create, I think, as Sue was talking about, you know, a vision for a better world and do the work to actually make that vision a reality. And artists have a leadership role to play because, you know, you bring that creativity, you bring that, you allow people to envision what can be, and inspire them to work to create the art, but also the reality of a neighborhood that serves them. And young people, when we did our Creating Our Next LA project, which you see one of the pieces behind me, you know, that was one of the things I said. This was during COVID. You know, artists and youth are super imaginers. And so, you know, to really activate that spirit, you know, and we need that more than ever now. We need imagination because, you know, things are not looking good. They're looking a little better than they were, but, you know, still it's a little dicey. So, you know, that's why I think this public art is so important in some ways, is because of that, bringing that, you know, creative spirit. Next slide.
Karen, we probably have about time for 2 more slides for you. So
Okay,
if you'd like
perfect.
to do
Okay.
those. Yeah.
So our values: creating opportunity for everyone, equity, you know, really bringing people into the process and addressing the inequities in the neighborhoods that we work in, and collaboration with partners that include the artists and the youth team, but also organizations. And just scroll through some of the artworks like quickly.
Yeah.
These are the youth gathering stories. You can just see the kinds of things that we've done. They are the ancestors. Cultural treasures of South LA, cultural asset mapping.
Yeah. Thank you,
That's
Karen.
it. Thank you.
Wow. What incredible work both of these organizations have put on that are truly kind of speaking to very particular contexts and very particular relationships with communities and with artists. And I'm really looking forward to speaking about that with you both in just a moment. I'm going to awkwardly introduce myself. Everyone who has been coming to this series over and over again, you've seen my face a lot. You've seen my colleague, Allie. I'm Emily Womack, a public art consultant and co-founder of Dyson and Womack. You can read my bio as you choose here. But as I'll be joining these amazing folks in conversation tonight, and as we're trying to unpack like the different roles and relationships within public art, I thought it was a good point to actually kind of share a little bit about Dyson Womack as well, some of the projects we've worked on in order to be able to provide some context about our roles and the different differentiations between those. So I'm just going to share a few projects that we have worked on, and then we'll be done with the jumping back and forth. So slightly differently from Sue and Karen, Dyson and Womack is a firm that I co-founded with Chris Dyson. We work on both consulting and art fabrication. And I know in our in-person workshops that we're currently refinding a good time that those will open, and we'll let everyone know when they do, that we're excited to open up the door a little bit on the fab side and share a little bit of the practicalities around that. But I really work more on our consulting side. And I think, as we jumped into tonight about why public art, what is public art, so much of the work that Dyson and Womack does is about supporting and working with governments, with artists, with organizations like LA Commons and Clock Shop to help and realize and envision. But we also do a lot of commissioning. We commission a lot of art. And because of that, we set a lot of values and we set a lot of goals for the work that we commission. One of those being working with artists who are new to the field and supporting them in realizing commissions of various sizes, not just small. We also do a lot with permanent works. So as folks may have heard me share a few weeks ago, we commissioned a collection for the California Air Resources Board. That is a state agency under the California Natural Resources Agency. This collection is in Riverside, California. It is free and open to the public if anyone wants to go see it. And it is one of the largest collections, actually globally, to directly and permanently discuss topics of climate change, of climate injustice, and many other topics around that. We commissioned, as I mentioned, 5 artists from various different careers and backgrounds, some who are traditionally gallery artists, such as Alora and Calzadia. Artists like Camila Janan Rashid, who work in video and text work, and really worked with Camila to translate her practice into a permanent installation that included both an interactive touchscreen video and this text piece. One of the things that's really important to us is working with artists to help translate their inherent practice into pieces that are lasting, that are permanent, but that also embody the practice that they carried with them throughout all of their career in different contexts. We also worked with Noé Montez. This was his first ever public art commission. What you're seeing here is a photograph he took in over the 2 years he spent researching climate injustices across the Inland Empire. This was a couple he came to know very well and very deeply, as they had been, as you can see, laying out their research to try to advocate for their community for better air quality. Ultimately, this turned into this wall piece where he collaged these photographs, and this is in the lobby of the California Air Resources Board. In fact, anyone who comes in, who gets called before their tribunal to have to stand up for bad air quality behavior, walks through this work as they enter the auditorium. We've also worked for several years in Santa Monica, producing art at Tongva, Realizing Indigenous Now, which is an amazing program that brought together Indigenous artists of dance, of visual art, of music, in a celebration in Tongva Park. One of the things I'm also very proud of that we've done is worked with the state to actually support and commission 13 artists for their first ever digital art collection, digital public art collection. Increasing avenues for entry of different art forms, of different media, is a big passion at Dyson and Womack. And, when we oftentimes get to work with commissioning agencies, say, okay, you've got this money, how do we want to use it? We're really looking at ways that we can find more avenues. This media wall was already paid for as part of the cost of the development and was going to be in this incredible lobby showing announcements, which, fair enough, announcements need to be shown, but oh my goodness, what a waste of a space. So we said, can we please also put art on this incredible wall? And as I mentioned, we were able to commission 13 artists whose work now resides in a permanent collection. If you're ever in Sacramento, I highly encourage you to go by the CNRA. That's the California Natural Resources Agency building. This is right in the lobby, along with a collection of other pieces. This is on the front of that building. This is in the lobby as well. And there's also a collection of photographs by Rachel Sussman, who documented the oldest living things across the world. This is her project, The Oldest Living Things. And we curated a selection of those photos for the CNRA. This is a piece by Ishi Glinsky that is also in the second floor lobby. It's skateboard wheels, recycled, upcycled skateboard wheels that make a very large, he takes a lot of indigenous culture bracelets and necklaces and different accoutrement, really blows them up and scales them up and utilizes these really different materials. So here he's using actual skateboard wheels as well as cast ones out of adobe and concrete. And lastly, on the non-permanent side, we've been worked with the City of Los Angeles in 2 iterations of the current LA triennial, both water and food. As I think you can see in some of these works, another passion is about integrating community-wide issues into the works that we are commissioning and supporting. In this role, we were the producers of this program. There were a set of curators on board. So our role was a little different here. Our role was to support artists and work with artists in realizing their projects rather than commission them, as we did in the previous slides. But there were incredible pieces all across LA for a month, similar to what you can see now as well for the PAiD program, if you have a chance to check that out. That really focused on community-wide issues around food, and again in 2016 around water, incorporating performance, film, and temporary installations. So I think that's all I wanted to, oops, we're not going to Q&A just yet, not jumping ahead of us. I just wanted to share that too, because I think it's important to give some context to where each of us are coming into this, what we have worked on, what projects we have championed, and how that has informed our understanding and our practices. And so I have stopped the screen share because for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm happy to invite Sue and Karen to join me in discussing some topics that kind of shape the question of why public art, but also shape what it is and how it informs and impacts our community, our broader Southern California community, et cetera. And I think in designing and thinking about this, we kind of started with this question of not why public art, but what is public art? What definitions we might have created for our own, organizations, but also our own understandings and of what values and ideals. So I'm just going to start out with just definitions are a great place to begin, and they help us to utilize language and to form relationships. And so opening it out with just what is public art, how have we each come into this space, and how is the organizational values help to inform that?
So I earlier this year spoke at a public art conference, international public art conference, and there was a definition that was put together for that. Public art is a reflection of our cultures with diverse meanings for the communities that interact with it. In all its forms, public art provokes reactions from the public. And it talks about conservation as well. But I think I'll stop there because I think that idea of provoking a reaction from the public is, I think, often what we are hoping for when we create public art. We want it to engage the public in many ways. And, often public art is thought of as a sculpture, but that is, just a very limited way of thinking about public art. You showed such a range in your slides, Emily, and I think that really does capture, the span of what the possibilities are, and there it even goes beyond that because, Brianna, when we were at our conference, they were talking about sound and, just all kinds of other medium that give people an experience of art in a public space.
A far cry from the time that we considered it to be monuments only, and
Yeah.
certainly monuments to a lot of perhaps not the right people.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, a living definition, it's interesting because for me, I am so often beholden to working with the definitions that the organizations we're working for have. So
Yeah.
for me, when I was thinking about this question of the definition, I was also thinking about what does that mean? For me, that means the work that we do to help agencies through public policy reform redefine and rethink about the definition over and over and over again. And so when I think of the definition, I think of the work behind it, the work behind every single word about how it means so much in terms of the impact that it has, and even in what you said there, but there's the fundamental things, right? There's people, there's space, there's art, there's relationships.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's interesting to think about in our experience of public art in the cityscape. And I think I focus in on urban public art just often because that's a lot of where it happens. But I don't want to be biased that public art doesn't happen in other places too. But I think within the urban landscape, when we think about public art, it's interesting to think about what it's not. It's not architecture. It's not something that requires some sort of transaction. Um, it's it's a break in some ways from the routine of moving through the city, and it's also an aesthetic set of symbols in many ways too that does say something about the city and about the place that's there. So I think it's oftentimes at Clock Shop we work with the notion of like a portal, that each artwork, it's both an object or it's not always an object, right? It can be many things, but one thing that it kind of shares in common is being a portal to perhaps a set of questions or a discussion or a set of ideas that and I think provoke is an interesting word, but maybe that invites us to take a step back and think differently about the spatial kind of um, imaginary that we've constructed around the place that we're in. So I think that idea of like the portal, but in order to, you can ignore a portal, you can walk right by it, but if you choose to sort of engage and step through, then it can kind of open a new set of ideas for you.
Yeah, I like that idea of thinking differently, kind of opening up a way to think differently as you consider, this physical work, or even, I think of festivals as public art, and and what is your relationship to what you're experiencing, and how does it open you up to think about the world in new ways. um, and because our work is often very participatory, the reflection process is not just in relationship to, something that you look at, but it's actually, this process that has resulted in the transformation in many ways, which is, because we work with young people, also, that it's very rich, in terms of their experience of themselves, of their neighborhood, of their neighbors. Um, so, and even strangers who may come to the Mass Festival, for example. So, but that idea of having an experience is very, I think, wanting to give the audience an experience, I think, is an important part of it.
I'm curious if I can ask you a question, Emily. Just how have you seen maybe the discourse from a city level around public art shift over time? So like, you know, from the days of monuments when it's sort of like, okay, we have a thing and we're going to put it in this public space and it has a certain way of, you know, to like the idea of plop art, just sort of like, oh, any like famous modernist guy, like let's put his art here because that signifies something about us, you know, and about our city. Um, I wonder if you've seen that shift, because obviously Karen and I working from a community organizational level are going to approach public art in a very particular way. But you know, on a city level, which are these commissioning bodies, you know, and that's where a lot of the money is. It's like, how has that discourse shifted over time?
Absolutely. And as I shared a couple weeks ago in a session, you know, my initial entry into this field was in Europe, in the UK and in Germany and in Berlin. And that's a totally different space. And coming back to the US about 15 years ago and reestablishing here was really quite a shock in some instances because of how different it was. It was a re-education in what public art meant and here at that time, and even until more recently than I'd care to admit, you know, some of the things that we were really involved with on a policy level were things that were really like fundamental things, like artists need to keep copyright. You know, like there were still some really, and I say still as though that's past, there are still, but I have seen a lot of shift over the last 15 years of like, some very things like it was bred and we just do that. We take copyright. We have to, because otherwise we're going to get sued and we can't do that. And that's not, you know, that's just, this is just how it is, to now, I think a very different landscape where, you know, and people like LA County and other organizations have led on this longer than others, but, you know, where now if you're taking copyright, you know, that's not great. We know that that's not great, even though there were rules and laws, et cetera. That was one area, but how it's funded. You know, I think the percent for art, we could spend a whole conversation about that. To me, that's the next kind of frontier. There is a space there that is about inherently coupling art to development, and that kind of beyond even the questions about like money and priorities, et cetera, couples the process with a process that is built through architecture and construction worlds. Instead of, I think, organically and authentically arriving out of perhaps more of an art mindset and need. And I have seen so much pain in projects over the years simply because of that kind of mashup of expectations. And one area, landscape or land architecture and construction, has 99.9% of the budget and art has 1%. So the power dynamic within that is also inherently skewed. So I think that's an area that there's a lot of work to be done on. But I have seen changes. I've seen a lot of changes in incremental ways of understanding when and how artists need to receive funds, of understanding, you know, some of the burdens of administration. Those are things we've talked about a lot in this PAiD program as well, and other avenues. But there's still work to be done, for sure. And I think for me personally, that 1% area is one of those that I would love to see a broader conversation on. And I actually am really excited about that in the context of Southern California, because I think we have so much space. And Sue, the space and land that you have been developing is very, you know, working on, not development, but working in, as it has lacked development in some ways, is indicative of that. Karen, the spaces that your projects pop up in, et cetera. And I think, you know, there's some resources there that I think could help shape perhaps the future and help to decouple some of work from a development driven space. And I know when we were chatting, we were talking a little bit about like, well, what is public art in Southern California is that different from public art in other spaces? And I was thinking about that as you both were speaking earlier, and thinking about that now too, of like space, community, all of those things are really uniquely, like, what is the unique lens of Los Angeles County in this building of narrative and definition, and how is that a benefit to us? And how maybe is it not? And I'm curious if there's things you've kind of come across in that roundabout way of asking a question to you both, that might be worth reflecting on.
I mean, what's interesting, I think, about, I mean, as you were talking, I couldn't help but think about graffiti and like just the significance of that approach to art making here. I was just with Man One, for example, a couple of Saturdays ago, and just, the evolution of that, him as an artist, and, just the amazing work that he does, and there are plenty of graffiti artists who have blown up after having developed their skills, on the streets of LA. And I'm thinking about that building that got taken over by the art that, I mean, speaking of, the development and graffiti, not in the way you were talking about, but,
Yeah.
Just that incredible creative drive, to the point where you put yourself in danger because you want to create. I feel like that freedom is somewhat a part of the culture of LA, as well as people being, you know, um, discriminated against in many ways. If you think about East LA and the mural culture that specifically is there, uh, throughout, but particularly in, I think it's the Strata Courts and that whole public housing development and its rich. I don't. That might not be the one, so don't quote me on that. But there is a housing development in East LA that has, just an incredible mural. Set of murals that were often about community empowerment, and I think that uh, uh, sort of instinct to take agency by putting yourself on the wall, does that go back to the cave paintings? I mean, like, of thinking about, the ones in the French wall, in the French caves, and is it like, and it's of animals, so is it like, I'm gonna go out tomorrow and I'm gonna get me some meat, so I put it on the wall. So anyway, those are some of the thoughts that are coming to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm a little bit of a like a urban history nerd, but I think about the idea of like the right to the city, the right for people to determine what their space and what their neighborhood looks and feels like, versus, I think our typical approach in American cities, which has been top-down sort of urban renewal programs, right? Where like, we're going to maximize the city, for basically profit-driven purposes to like facilitate, the acquisition of more profit in whatever spaces we possibly can. And that's been our kind of typical approach to cities. I mean, I'm hopeful that that is shifting and changing as we are facing multiple crises, but that's kind of where a lot of that came from. And so public art with the Percent for Art program, and I think that fact that it's so closely tied to development is crucial here, because it's like you're implicated in that, as part of a public art program, and there's a lot of sort of values and built into the structure through which public art is being produced in cities. And I think it gets echoed through the types of art that make it, especially into like these permanent public commissions, that very problem. And so you do see in places that are very, you know, have deep cultural histories and are very much like seizing back either from frustration or rage or the need to determine their own right to the city, like through these aesthetic means. And I think of Roberto Bedoya, who was the cultural affairs chief in Oakland. He talks about the poetics of belonging and sort of how people make their aesthetic mark on the places that they feel belonging with. I mean, I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about all of these different kinds of public art, you know, where without like how do they exist and what are the values through which that's wrapped up in their production, I think is also part of it too.
One of the things that comes up a lot in a lot of the temporary projects that we've done is just the expansiveness as well of the city and the difficulty of navigating. And I'm saying city of Los Angeles, but I mean the wider LA County region, and the I mean, with PST opening this weekend, I was reminded again of the expansiveness and, you know, the privilege to move around it and the privilege to see it. And I also was thinking a lot about like how I think a lot of our art and our public art is also molded and shaped by that fact alone. And, you know, there's an element to it that is kind of like performative because documentation and getting it online has become so crucial. Because in some cases, you know, otherwise it kind of doesn't necessarily have a lasting space. And it makes me start to think about permanent and temporary because like, is permanent even permanent if no one can get to Riverside to see the piece or to, you know, Clock Shop to see the piece, you know? And I think the sheer scale of our city and our county impact those relationships. And it makes me start to kind of, you know, one of the things I've thought a lot about as well in commissioning permanent public arts is that definition of permanent. And what do we mean by that? And why do we mean it that way? And picking up where you left, Sue, about the 1%, you know, one of the things that I think is an interesting way to start to kind of unpack or break that apart a little bit is actually to start to question what we mean by permanent. You know, in public art in the world that I operate in and the cities we operate in, we have working definitions of 25 years. You know, that's what a piece has to live for. But like culturally, significantly, mentally, those years, you know, that's just the physical object. And there's something about the presence of, you know, you guys have both shown some temporary pieces that I think live in the cultural zeitgeist in the mind far beyond the few days, months, or weeks that it may have been open or even night that it was performed. And so I think that's a really generative space to begin to start to say, you know, can we kind of collapse those definitions? Can we think about if our space and our way of operating starts to kind of provide a platform to rethink what these distinctions that have existed in public art so long, these walls between permanent, temporary, you know, funding goes in this way for one and funding goes in this way for another. And if we start to question those definitions, does it start to question the ways that they're infrastructurally and structurally built?
I mean, is the distinction around the investment in the fabrication process, like that feels like that's one
For sure.
big distinction. And you know, certainly adds to the cost of the artwork. So, you know, I feel like you know, that in some ways makes sense. You know, but I feel like and this is one of the reasons why we have really focused on temporary is because I feel like people after a while, you know, the permanent in some ways almost blends into the landscape and people don't see it as much because it's been there for so long. Now, you know, there's a way to change that, and that's to maybe couple it with temporary so that, you know, that space where that piece is becomes a place where the community gathers, you know, often or, you know, annually to you know, be in community. And so, you know, that coupling of those two, you know, kind of distinctive categories of art, you know, kind of starts to bridge the challenges, I think, with each. Um, yeah, you know, I do think that there is, you know, like, I don't know, Emily, you kind of maybe work the line a little bit more because we don't really do that much permanent art. So I'm wondering, you know, how you see those two coming together, or, you know, the alignment
Hmm.
moving, you know, so that they're not so distinctive.
Well, I think it starts with a question of value. Like, I think, as you're saying, yes, there are some infrastructural things. If you're saying something needs to go on a building and live for 25 years, it's going to drive certain costs in a different way than perhaps something that's existing for a night, etc. But I think underneath that, just structural part, there's a very strong kind of divide about how those are prioritized in terms of budgets and funded in terms of rules and laws, and how they're supported and contracted is wildly different. It's like there is a massive gulf almost between those conversations. And I think what I'm trying to say is like if you start to go, well, what is permanent? If we talk about what you were just kind of saying, spaces that might alter or change, but we still consider them as a permanent space of work or space of art, you know, and what if we start to value that a night-long performance might have a longer impact, and think of that not just as a temporary or a pop-up. We start to value these and think about their place and their role in community and in building community narratives, then I think it starts to creep at the gaps of the infrastructure and structure I was saying. It's not that there's going to be things about how they're built and how they're done that are always going to be different, but I do think that huge wall becomes a barrier for participation because it sets up so many limitations on one side, and while it can be perhaps more open on the other, it is typically underfunded and undersupported in other ways. And so I just have some curiosity about how perhaps being less rigid there might actually allow us to bring in some of the benefits or negatives from both sides.
I think it's
Yeah,
a great what.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I love this sort of provocation of like, how do you couple the permanent with the temporary, or I would say the long term, because I feel like nothing's permanent. But you know, thinking about, I wish more cities, when having a big public art budget, you know, would ask the question of like who is this for and what are the outcomes we'd like to see?
Mm-hmm.
And before determining that, like, oh, we need 10 new public art pieces, you know, and we're going to use this for that. But opening up that question more, I think, allows for a lot more possibilities. I think an interesting thought that popped in my mind that you also alluded to, Emily, I think is like, I've been familiar with projects over time that have culminated in some sort of space. You know, it's like, okay, this is a residency that's being funded for 5 years, and it's going to have rotating artists who are going to have use of this space and are going to be doing projects within it. There's a few projects like Neighborhood Time Exchange in Philadelphia and some that were like that. And it was specifically local artists from the very community where the space was sited that, you know, had access to this space and this kind of programming platform. It's like, is that something that is more impactful to the arts and cultural ecosystem of the neighborhood than this permanent piece? Or do we need this permanent piece to serve somewhat of a different outcome? Like, you know, what I was talking about earlier in terms of like the poetics of belonging, or the aesthetics of kind of marking a space in a certain way, which I think there can be beautiful work, permanent work done after a really good process, obviously, you know, that results from that. And I've worked on both kinds of programs. And so I think there's a way that we can like just expand our definition of what it means to fund art in public space, you know, that may look very different. You know, it may look like a platformer. It may look, I mean, I would love if public art budgets could go towards more nonprofit arts and cultural institutions being able to have space, like especially in our city. I feel like that's, you know, if there's free public programming being provided and performances and things that are like community facing. I mean, I think there's like really interesting questions to be had about how we restrict those public art budgets to objects, you know, and there's some cities that have been able, especially during the pandemic, to kind of break beyond that in really interesting ways, but out of necessity. But I would love us to kind of hold on to that idea of like, oh wait, you know, maybe the object is not the answer here. You know, maybe it is, but maybe it's actually not. Maybe there's something else that we could do that would have a really fantastic impact. Or if there's like a community festival that happens every year in the public square and they have a lot of trouble fundraising for it, why not underwrite something like that, you know, rather than put an object in the middle of that public square? Like that actually might be a more impactful use of funds.
Yeah, you know, this idea of cultural infrastructure is really appealing to me, you know, as someone who is around planners all the time. So to think about, you know, like really seriously planning for culture in the same way that, you know, you do all the other elements of, you know, the planning process, and, you know, recognizing that, you know, and one of the things that we're struggling with right now is this idea of belonging, which is a big part of what we do. And you know, it's you have to you know, be conscious about that. I think if you want places to feel, particularly in this modern age, you know, with the capitalism being dominant, you know, and in so many, you know, this is what we're talking about in many ways. So to, you know, have a counter to that that really prioritizes the relationships between people as opposed to the relationship with money, so that, you know, people experience their places as a place of connection. You know, the art programming, you know, as well as maybe a sculpture that they participated in a process of, you know, envisioning with the artist, you know, so that, you know, there's just this sense of groundedness that I can relate to, because, you know, this public art, you know, is related to me and my neighbors, and, you know, the ideas, the themes, etc., that are that invite the dialogue, you know, as we talked about, which is so, you know, when you think about social capital, that opportunity to interact, which, you know, public art can be a spark for that, you know, whether it is participating in the creation of the work or just participating in a conversation about this artwork and what it means. So you know, I would love to, and ostensibly, you know, the Cultural Affairs Department or the LA County Department, you know, the arts, I forget what the local arts agencies, in some ways, they are thought of as cultural infrastructure, but usually the budgets are so small that it's hard to really have a real impact.
If I can just do a little sidebar plug, I really would encourage folks to come to this second one if this is a topic you're interested in, that we're going to have about administering public art in a few weeks, when LA County is going to be kind of showing under the hood a little bit, because I think what both of you have just talked about and reflected on hits up against policy. Like, why don't, as you were saying, we look at the array of things and say, what are the lead by outcomes? What are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And why can't we fund this space more nimbly, than something else? And with the funding, I think what I can offer back to that is like, all of the funds are tied to rules and laws and regulations that are coming, not even just from LA County in some instances, and I'm just pointing to them in this one because I know a lot about it. I've been educated through this program about it, but are coming from grants and federal government and state government, and they're all tied to so many rules about how they can be used. And so I'm also really, really intrigued by this space within this world for policy warriors to be like, let's get into the nitty gritty of this, because that is kind of, a space to say, first, what are the ideals we'd like to see? But then how do we really understand how we can change them? And it will take that level of sitting and kind of advocating for these policy level changes that are usually far outside of the hands of the actual arts commissioning agency. They're levels and levels above that. And so it was making me think a lot about like the role of policy, the role of advocacy, on that side of things as you guys were talking. But I didn't want to distract from the questions around community, because I think, I think about it that way, but I think the roles that you both play are also about taking what funds you do have and the things that you are, because you can operate more nimbly. You can ask those questions that perhaps a government or a larger organization may not be able to. And I'm curious, because this is something I don't know as much about, is like, well, in your own practices, how do you model that behavior that you were just talking about leading by outcomes, about authenticity within working with communities, uh, because I think that's something that is so strong and so visible. You see it immediately when you look at the works that you guys shared tonight.
Yeah, I mean, our work is, it's really community driven. So every project has a set of partners, and the partners get together and they select an artist that hopefully has a connection to the community, and then that artist leads a process that involves others to realize that artwork. And so that set of values that I talked about earlier is integrated into everything that we do now. Our work is funded by various sources. Because we involve youth, we get a lot of youth development support, which is very helpful. But we're looking at other streams of funding as well to support our projects, because, interestingly, there is a recognition in other arenas that, art and culture is a powerful strategy for achieving those outcomes. I had a conversation with the head of the county's Office of Sustainability recently, and they're thinking about resilience centers, and art and culture comes up for her as a really effective strategy for supporting, the work they're doing to acclimatize people, in this changing environment that we have. Health and mental health are also really important. Like, the We Rise project here in LA funded a lot of public art around the county. And mental health dollars are still funding. We got funded this year, not through that program, but through another program. So really thinking about, what communities need, and then designing or offering art as a solution for, you know, the challenges is, you know, one way that and I think I like that way actually on some level, because it does integrate art into, you know, the community in the myriad
Mhm.
ways. You know, communities aren't single issue, you know, everything is integrated. So culture actually resides at the intersection of almost everything. You know, I mean, it intersects problematically because our systems are not sensitive to, you know, the various cultures that are present in our society. But you know, once you start to bring people and culture, then, you know, outcomes improve because the system, you know, as a result of people being able to express themselves through art and culture, the systems, you know, evolve. So, you know, I think that you know, gets closer to that idea of cultural infrastructure that I've been talking about as well.
Yeah. Sue, when we were talking about this earlier in planning, you said something that I wrote down because I loved it so much, which was not just like, you know, concerns and questions around social practice or you know, there's so many words we've used, from placemaking to site specific to social practice over the years in this field. And you were like, and I'm sorry if I'm characterizing it wrong, but kind of like, nah, I'm not sure how I feel about all of these, but you're like, rather instead, where does public art sit? Where does it exist within these wider community efforts? And I thought that was such a beautiful way of posing that question. And I wondered if you might reflect on that for us a little bit tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that we tend to theorize artistic practice in a certain way, but I've always been interested in the question of just what is art's role in our society, you know, what can that role be?
Mhm.
And so I agree completely with everything that Karen said. You know, culture is at the nexus of everything, you know, the way that we experience and frame our world. And I think what we're living through now is really cultural crises of isolation, you know, and people feeling very cut off from one another. And that there is this incredibly important role that art has to play in helping people rekindle a social and emotional connection, you know, to place, to each other, to the place where they live, to the people around them. And I think that, and that's at the core of Clock Shop's mission, as well as, you know, we talk about creating connections to place as well as, you know, feelings of care and belonging, because that is something that we are lacking in great measure in in many of our city spaces, you know, other than the places where people have kind of through sheer grit and will and often a lot of like cultural capital have kind of made it happen. But you're swimming upstream a bit, I think, in terms of our larger system. So, you know, I think that art has the opportunity to be very invitational to people, you know, to really invite people in from broad cross sections of society around maybe a topic or around just like connecting to each other and to the place where they live, so that, and we're very intentional about this at Clock Shop, so that they can then advocate for those places that they care about, right? Because if you don't care about a place, you're not going to do anything to shift any policy around it because you don't care. You don't give a shit, you know? And so it's just like, whatever, this place is going to hell. I don't care. But if people feel that connection and they care about their neighbors and they feel like they belong in that neighborhood, they don't want to see it, you know, become a place that's unfriendly and is not a place, you know, that serves their community well anymore, or is a place of well-being and thriving for all the people that are there. So I think that that's really at the crux of it. And art plays this very particular role, I think, in being able to either unveil histories of places that are hidden, the stories and the people that live there, that built the culture of those places. You know, it has ways that it can reflect those decades of work. You know, it can also have ways that just kind of open people's eyes to what's around them and maybe ask those larger questions of like, yeah, the paradigm that you're in, is that really the one you want to be living in? Or is this a little window into something different, you know, where it could be a different kind of connection to place that you could have. So I think those, you know, those are often the things that I think about when we think about our projects, and if they're successful or not, and, you know, how are they kind of inviting people in, creating that connection, you know, who's part of the making of them so that it's reflecting or uplifting or being part of the larger community narrative. I mean, the other thing I'll say is that I do think our crises are many and they're large, and I think there used to be a lot more, I don't know, self-imposed boundaries between like art for art's sake, and like this is, you know, its own kind of sacred world, and politics and all that other stuff is out there. Obviously, there's always people who broke those boundaries over and over. But I think there's a lot more, I just hear a lot more from kind of government entities or places that hold a lot of the funding and the power, you know, of an interest in looking at all sides of maybe one of the big issues that we face, and wanting to have arts and culture at the table and addressing them, you know, because and we think about issues like housing justice, and we think about environmental justice, and but we're not a housing justice organization. We're an arts and culture organization. But I'm always thinking about like, how do we triangulate our role if housing justice is the biggest issue in our community? Do we triangulate our role to enhance that in some way, right? And what can we do to be part of that conversation in partnership with other folks in the community that are sort of working towards similar goals?
So Karen and Sue, I'm aware that we are getting near our hour where we need to see if there's any questions, any comments, and things like that. And so as much as I could sit and have this conversation with you both for probably another hour, I'm going to pose one final thought and ask that we each take maybe 1 minute to reflect on. And it's really simply just, so what's next? What's next maybe for your organization? What's next maybe for you in terms of how you're thinking about these topics, or what might be the next goal you have for change or for a new vision? And maybe we can have those quick roundabouts, and then we'll have Brianna from the county come back and join us and go to some questions.
Could I jump in? So I, you know, what's exciting about our work to me is we get to work on some really, exciting and defining projects. Right now, one of the projects we're working on, one of our state senators, Lola Smallwick Cuevas, has been able to secure some funding for a Black cultural district in Los Angeles. Now, the state of California has cultural districts throughout the state. None of them focus on the African American community. So this would be the first of that kind. And so, you know, this will require creating, you know, public spaces at various intersections around South LA to mark the Black Cultural District. And so, you know, it's an interesting opportunity to lift up stories of that, you know, kind of thinking in complement to Destination Crenshaw, obviously, which is focused on that as well. And so, you know, a lot of the issues that we're talking about now are really present in that project, getting people to think a little more broadly about what might be possible in terms of markers. So it's not just your typical marker, but really a place. Like, and how do we create a place that then people connect to regularly and animate regularly so that it's, you know, continues to be alive for the community. And that work is tied to our Cultural Treasures of South LA project, which is, you know, mapping the assets and then making them visible. So, you know, just thinking about how we can use these processes that we've been discussing to, you know, continue to uplift artists in this part of the city as well as others. And, you know, the Olympics is providing a really fascinating opportunity for that as well. And we'll be hosting with the county some conversations about that coming up here in the next few months. So, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves and how that can contribute to, you know, this community building that we know is so possible if we support the arts in the way that we would like them to be supported.
Can't wait. Sue, would you like to go, or I can too, whichever?
Sure. Yeah, we also engage in a cultural asset mapping process. We call it our cultural atlas, and it's takemetoyourriver.org. So it's focused on the riverside communities of Northeast LA. We launched it last year, but we've now gotten to the point where we've collected about 70 interviews. They're making their way onto the site, and we're about to kick off a bunch of programming around it, but all of it has a really particular purpose, which is, you know, to ensure that the programming that we're developing for the future Bowtie Park is very connected and reflective of community, and that we can really act as a facilitator for the use of that space. And so I'm really excited about going through over the next couple of years the process of like really creating a cultural plan around the use of the new park. It's you know, we're aware that there's going to be a loss. It's been this really interesting experimental space for 20 years. And so as it becomes a formal park, it becomes more accessible for many more different kinds of people and activities, but there's also this kind of rawness about it that is being lost. So we want to honor that and the cultures that have been built up around it, but then also provide a really dynamic programming for the future park. So that's kind of our next few years.
Awesome. And I encourage folks who are on this Zoom tonight that if you're interested, I imagine both LA Commons and Clock Shop have ways that you can get involved in these and other projects. I heard talks about interns and all sorts of things tonight, and I am sure there's work and space. So I do encourage folks to see what's going on and how you might get involved. From my end, you know, we've been rather invested in this PAiD program for some time. And that's the first cycle is coming to an end soon, and we will be thinking about the second cycle. So another round of artist council members, another round of professional development workshops, but beyond programmatic stuff and work, I think I keep coming back to the name of this program. And I think that Brianna, who is going to join us in just a second, who wrote this grant for this project, was very prescient in saying, calling it PAiD. we've talked about a lot of things, but money always seems to come back to the heart of some of it. And so I think for me, there's an interest in really kind of widening and deepening that conversation around policy and process and standards of how artists are paid, what's paid when, and all of that. So that's a space that I'm excited to continue both within the confines of this project, this program, and out with. And again, a little different entity. We're not a nonprofit over here, but we still do a lot of work that cross-sects with these areas. And I also encourage folks, if you're interested, to reach out to us, because we have opportunities and we have space and we have time to give. Supporting artists is central to that mission. So I'm going to invite Allie M., my colleague, to join us again, and I'm going to invite her to invite Brianna back into this conversation too. Brianna, as you're moving from attendee ether to presenter ether, and not to put you on the spot, you can also say, no, thanks, I'm good. But I did want to offer, if there was anything that you've heard tonight, or that, from your perspective, if you wanted to add anything before we jump into questions, you're welcome to. And again, this is Brianna McGillivray with the County of Los Angeles Arts and Culture Department, one of the PAiD program managers, and also, as I mentioned, the amazing human who wrote the grant for this program.
Thank you, Emily, so much. Yeah, I'm so pleased to be in conversation with all of you. Karen and Sue, I'm just such a big fan of both of your organizations. I followed, your programming and projects over the years, and it was just really beautiful to see kind of the snapshot overview you gave, like all of the images I'm just blown away by, and just, all of the layers that go into all of those projects. So I'm super pleased that you guys could both be here today sharing your wisdom. But I don't think I have anything else to add. I mean, Emily kind of said it. I have been, working on this program for years, and a lot of this work takes years to get off the ground. So, we realize that there is so much more work to be done, but do know that there's a lot of people, in civic art and the department and across other agencies and nonprofits that are thinking about all these things and trying to make changes, even if you don't immediately see it. So
I don't think that we would be sitting here tonight having this conversation if that wasn't the case. So Allie, do we have any questions or additions to the conversation from our guests and participants tonight?
We had a couple questions. I know we don't have much time, but someone did ask for clarification. This might be a question for you, Emily, about kind of the copyright that you were talking about. They said, I think were you meaning to say that artists retain copyright in America and they don't in Europe? Or is it the other way around? And if you could provide some clarification on that.
Yeah, and I won't speak directly too much about the UK because it's been a while since I've been involved there. But I did mean that for longer than I would have liked to see, arts or organizations were retaining copyright in America. They were not giving copyright to artists. Even though we have things, if you're familiar with, called VARA, the Visual Arts Rights Act, and CAPA, the California Rights Act, Artists' Rights Act, there are still some really big organizations out there, not just organizations, government entities out there that until even just maybe 2 years ago, were retaining copyright. So we're keeping that and not giving it to artists. So there was a lot of work there to be done. And as I said, I'm not speaking about LA County. I know you guys have done things differently for quite some time. But perhaps even that is what I meant to say.
And then I guess that was the question that we had. And then someone left a lovely comment saying how much they appreciated the definitions and distinctions between all the terminology in public art. And especially the conversation around permanence versus permanence. And yeah, they they also commented when someone said that I forgot who said it, but they said a place where policy warriors are positioned. But I think that was it for the questions. I think so. I had a question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Allie. Go ahead.
As you know, I look at all of you as cultural leaders. And I would say, like, what are some of the biggest struggles that, artists face in public art? And what are some like top level ways that we could help them as organizations and like resources available?
I can jump in with just some of my thoughts. I think that we often work with more emerging artists or artists who haven't gained a huge amount of institutional support yet. And for many of them, it's their first public project. So their first project in public space. I think that wrangling scale is a huge piece of it, to go from the formal outwards, but just like, doing work in a 32-acre park and having the kind of impact that you would like to have and understanding the park uses around you as well, it is really, it's a tricky thing. And I think it takes support, it takes kind of like being a thought partner, being a collaborator in many ways with the artist to kind of work through, or ensuring that they have the resources to like work through some of those formal questions. Because it can be just a dramatic shift in context, especially for somebody who's worked in mostly gallery settings for a lot of their career so far and are trying to make the leap to public. I think that budgeting is another big piece because there's often budget items that come up that you didn't even think to put in your budget, like $8,000 to replace the grass after the temporary sculpture is gone, and you're like, what? But it's helpful to have folks who, like Emily or like others who've sort of been through many, 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 many projects with many, many, many different types of public spaces who can like give you the heads up about like, oh, you're going to need to think about this, and oh, you're going to need to think about this, and like, and that helps an artist, I think, in a way, like get closer to their vision, but in a way that kind of satisfies the needs of the public space. I think also bringing people into the project who are not just the arts people is really, really important. And I mean, that's on like the ground level of like community members in really authentic ways, but also like the maintenance workers, the park staff, the people who service the sprinkler system. How do you like really bring people in, listen to their concerns about the potential project, and not put all of that on the artist, because it's really hard. Like, I think we take upon ourselves to maintain those really good relationships so the artist doesn't have to come in and like form those new relationships themselves, because that takes a lot of time and is really hard, and they need to be, able to focus on the project. So I think those are just like a couple of the things. They're very sort of practical, logistical things off the top of my head that I think about when I think about artists who are, especially ones that are new to working in public space.
I mean, we work a lot with new artists as well. And I mean, I would second much of what you said. And, one of the things we look for when we're hiring an artist is their ability to collaborate. And not every artist has that skill set. And and not that we aren't against helping people to develop it, but some people just are not inclined that way. So that is a very important quality in terms of an artist who does, not just the really deep community engagement that we do, but I think any public artist, you're going to have to deal with others providing input usually. One of the things that we struggle with, usually we insulate the artists from this, but if you don't have an LA Commons, you're gonna have to deal with it yourself, which is permitting, which is, can be nightmarish, in various ways. I mean, like doing art, you're talking about doing art in a park, like at least you have some control over a park. Try doing art in a park you have no control over. Like that is a tall order to get the approvals to actually do work in a park. So, I think that really, having chops around dealing with public entities is, that really is a requirement if you're working in the public realm. I think I'm just trying to think if there was anything else, but those are the two biggies that I think artists kind of struggle with.
Thank you. We received 2 more questions. Someone is asking, and they're curious, how you determine or how organizations determine the efficacy and impact of their projects.
I.e. that leading with outcomes comment we were talking about. So yeah, I think that's a great question about how do we define and evaluate our efficacy and impact as we're leading with outcomes.
I mean, we do pre and post conversations with, people involved in various ways with the projects. So, and because we work with youth and we get funding that relates to youth, we have to report on that. So we're always looking for outcomes related to youth and their ability to actually, their art skills, their leadership skills, just ability to work in a team setting. So that's one layer. Bronwyn, the wonderful Bronwyn, actually, we have a project called Healthy Culture Hub, and she helped us think about outcomes for that project, which have to do with belonging and community agency, that kind of thing. So we measure that, and that cuts across projects, even ones that are not quite as intensive around, the site and focused on, a healthy community, which it really is all of our work. So, it kind of depends on what the focus is, but, generally youth, community, artists, we're really focused on artist development now. So how are artists moving along the developmental trajectory? Are we helping them? So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, it's not an easy task ever to evaluate something that's at the end of the day qualitative, and very subjective. But I think that, for the county on the majority of on all of our projects, I should say, we, start with a lot of, we start with those values and those goals that we try to identify through conversations with community members impacted by the project, but oftentimes that's staff if it's at a facility. We look at and listen to the goals of the various project stakeholders, their values for the project. So it's really talking to a variety of different groups who all have separate and oftentimes overlapping goals and ideas. And then I think as a project scope or concept begins to take shape, ideally it should be a balance between all of those separate perspectives. And so when you can strike some sort of balance where everyone is heard, maybe you can't do everything, but there was space for all of that to be kind of held at one time and considered. And then there's clear kind of reasoning for why certain, avenues are taken and why, other trade-offs had to happen or certain things can't be made. Then, project starts to take shape. And then at the end of that project, there are certain, there's a certain kind of self and collective assessment that happens about like how well did that match up with where we started. And sometimes it can be, through post project surveys or exit interviews with the artists, with community members, with stakeholders. Those are some of the ways that, we try to track that or look at efficacy, but it's definitely an imperfect process. But I think that's sort of trying to, in this collaborative spirit, trying to find balance throughout all of it is like sort of where you want to be. Because if it goes to kind of one extreme or the other, then it's, you're never gonna, you're definitely gonna make some people unhappy. So trying to sort of reach that is, that consensus is tough though.
So this might be the final question for the night, but this was directed towards Sue. If you had any reading recommendations, they want to think about a lot about site-specific art and identity after reading Mi-Won Kwon's book, One Place After Another. And if you had any books or organizations they should look into.
Yeah, I mean, I'll think back to my public art master's education, but a couple of the things that really helped me think about it were some of the early festivals that were really dedicated to site-specific art and temporary art and had very like specific locations. So the Spoleto Festival in North Carolina, and a lot of the work that was done around that, because I think these were some of the festivals that were like at the cusp of really defining what different kinds of public art could look like. The Insight festivals along the border, specifically like Insight 05, there were some really interesting works that were created in that very specific socio-political context that I think are amazing and kind of stunning in different ways. And so that might be a couple places to start, and then you can sort of see what those artists were doing and follow, some of their work further on, the ones that speak to you. I mean, there's just a lot of really amazing organizations in Los Angeles that are also doing public art in their very own specific ways. There's LA Commons, there's us, there's Land, the LA Nomadic Division, there's Lauren Bond's project, Metabolic Studio. There is Lace, often does really, and Free Waves do really interesting like public art festivals. So I think also just getting really familiar with the landscape of smaller organizations in your city, that are regularly doing work on the cutting edge with LA artists, I think is a wonderful place to start kind of exploring more.
Thank you.
Amazing. I'll just quickly add, there's a book that I always go back to. It's called Decadent Public Art, Contentious Practice, Contested Space. That's a really great book. I think you can still get it on eBay, maybe. I don't think it's in publication anymore. And there's also a few other books that I think we put in the recommendation list of one of the earlier sessions around community engagement and social practice that might be of interest. So we can re-forward that list around as well. Thank you all so much for coming tonight, for participating in this conversation, and for being so generous with your time and your experience, your background, your visions and your ideals and hopes and dreams and all of the above. And so before we just do close out, I just want to say thank you again. We always put this up, just a reminder, we are doing this workshop series again next year. We'll be developing the content for that in the coming months. If there are things that we have not covered in this series that you would like to see in the other series, if you have other questions, comments, or feedback, you're always welcome to reach out to us. Again, we have 3 more online workshops. I know there are a couple questions about the in-person ones, and we will put out more information once those are rescheduled. I think they will happen in October, and we'll definitely let folks know when those are ready to be signed up for. The in-person ones are going to be more focused on fab and fabrication resources and materials and mediums, and I know there's a lot of interest there. That's also something we may build out and expand upon a bit more in the next workshop series. But for now, these 3 online sessions you can attend, and I hope that we will see some of you back there. That's it for tonight. So again, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.